Logan, we're sunsetting your division effective immediately. The words cut like glass, delivered with perfect corporate detachment by Elaine Masters, Chief Strategy Officer of Northwave BioTech. She didn't even blink. Beside her, Ron from HR nodded solemnly, already sliding the severance folder across the table as if he were performing a routine funeral. They claimed it was a shift in vision redirecting R&D budgets toward more youth-driven innovation. Translation? I, a 47-year-old man who built Northwave's neural engine from scratch, no longer fit their shiny pitch deck for investors. I looked down at the folder, already knowing what was inside. Severance terms, healthcare coverage, a list of transition counselors I'd never call. What didn't they know? I'd read the signs. I knew this was coming. How I responded? I kept my face still. Calm. I gave them what they weren't expecting. No anger. No pleading. Just a nod and a quiet, understood. It was Thursday, 3:16 p.m. The sky outside the 19th floor window was overcast. Rain tapped the glass like a slow countdown. In a frosted glass conference room, I had designed myself ironically for brainstorming breakthroughs. Now, it was where they broke me off. But they had no idea. I wasn't just leaving. I had already started building something they couldn't imagine. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't need to. I'd already lived this moment in my head 100 times, rehearsed it like a war game. For weeks, I'd sensed the shift, the whispered meetings I wasn't invited to, the budget reports I wasn't CC'd on, and the casual way interns began referring to me in the past tense. So it didn't break me when Elaine delivered the final blow in that glass coffin of a conference room. It validated what I already knew. They were planning to bury me. But what Elaine didn't know, what no one at Northwave knew, was that I had already started digging elsewhere. 3 months earlier, a careless intern misrouted a Slack thread. One tap. That was all it took. I opened the message and found my namey department highlighted in a confidential talent efficiency strategy deck by Northwave's consulting firm. The slide was titled, Phasing Out Legacy Contributors. My photo sat beneath it, next to the words, costly, redundant, not aligned with new brand narrative. It hit like a punch. But instead of spiraling, I pivoted. I went home that night and pulled out the prototype from the encrypted drive I kept offline. The neural engine I'd been refining for 2 years, long after office hours ended, running simulations on personal hardware. It was faster, leaner, and exponentially more scalable than the version Northwave had built their product on. And crucially, I documented every line of code, every test, every breakthrough outside company hours, using zero company resources. I knew Northwave had never filed a patent for the original algorithm. I'd asked legal about it 6 months earlier, and they brushed it off with, "We're waiting on budget clearance." That was the moment I smelled the rot. So, I did what any survivor does. I prepared. I called a name I hadn't spoken to in years. Bryce Nolan, co-founder and current CEO of Veltrix Dynamics, one of Northwave's fiercest competitors. We hadn't talked since grad school, but he scheduled dinner that week when I told him what I hadn't, who was trying to erase me. We met at a jazz bar in Phoenix, far from the sterile glass towers of Silicon Valley. Over whiskey and Miles Davis, we laid the groundwork for the next phase. The deal was simple. I'd file for a patent under my name, backed by Veltrix's legal team. They'd front the fees, assign me their top IP counsel, and, in exchange, receive exclusive licensing rights to my next-gen neural engine. I'd join them as chief technology strategist, with complete creative control, equity stake, and a team built from scratch. Bryce wasn't just offering me a job, he was handing me a throne. 2 weeks later, the patent was filed with airtight documentation timestamps, local storage logs, device IDs, the whole playbook. No loopholes, no ambiguity, just proof. And then we waited. I kept showing up at Northwave like nothing had changed, attending meetings, giving progress updates, and training junior engineers who were likely hired to replace me. All the while, my patent quietly moved through review. When it was approved, I didn't celebrate. I stared at the email for 10 minutes, then closed my laptop. Game on. By Wednesday, the week of my termination, Bryce texted, "Contract signed. Press release ready. Monday, we launch." Where? In every major tech journal, in the inboxes of Northwave's most prominent investors, on the faces of the executives who thought they could erase a mind like mine. They wanted me gone, but I was never theirs to begin with. Monday arrived with desert sunlight bleeding through the skyline. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my apartment, adjusting the cuff of my tailored navy suit. Not Northwave's cheap corporate swag. Not their beige identity. This was mine, custom-stitched. Sharp. Built for war. The press release dropped at 7 a.m. sharp-timed with digital precision. Just as planned. Veltrix Dynamics secures exclusive rights to next-gen neural engine. Logan Weller appointed Chief Technology Strategist. My name is front and center. No asterisk, no fine print. Just ownership pure and undeniable. The why behind all this? I watched others get rewarded for noise for too long while I carried the system on my back in silence. I designed the framework that Northwave monetized, while consultants used my metrics in slide decks without even learning what those numbers meant. My career had become a polite erasure. So I decided, if they wouldn't let me lead within, I'd burn the blueprint and build the future elsewhere. Bryce called at 7:04 a.m., his voice already buzzing with excitement. It's spreading. TechSpot, fast code, and The Verge there, running it on the front page. Logan, it's happening. And it was. Notifications flooded my phone. LinkedIn DMs, email pings, texts. The most satisfying came at 7:39 a.m. from a former mentee at Northwave. Holy shit, did you do this? The entire 15th floor is in meltdown. Meanwhile, 8 miles across the city, Northwave HQ lit up like a Christmas tree. The executive team's Monday planning session never happened. Instead, it was hijacked by board members, legal counsel, and investor relations all scrambling to respond to what they labeled a reputational shockwave. Elaine tried to maintain control, but she had no answers, because she never asked the right questions. She never thought to ask what I was doing after hours, whose name would appear in the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. By 9 a.m., I was stepping through the sleek glass entrance of Veltrix HQ. No badge scan is needed. The receptionist already knew who I was. She smiled and handed me a branded access card. Logan Weller, Chief Technology Strategist. No awkward onboarding. No HR seminar. Just respect. Waiting at the door. I walked past the open concept development bay where 60 engineers were already working on product lines I'd soon oversee. My office? Corner. Floor-to-ceiling views of the Arizona mountains. A mahogany desk sat beside a digital command center that tracked live feedback on the neural engine's integration simulations. Early numbers showed 47% faster processing efficiency than anything on the market. At 9:30 a.m., I received a direct email from Northwave's legal team with the subject line, "Urgent clarification needed regarding IP ownership." I didn't even open it. I forwarded it straight to Veltrix Legal. Let the attorneys dance. By 10:15 a.m., my assistant, yes, I had one now walked in with coffee and a report from PR. Our launch had gone viral. 3 investment groups had already called asking about the engine. 2 competitors had inquired about licensing. Northwave. Still radio silence. Still spiraling. And then came the moment that sealed it. At exactly 11:07 a.m., I got a message from someone I hadn't heard from in years. Martin Castillo, who used to run Northwave's R&D before they forced him into early retirement. His message was one sentence: "You're the ghost they never saw coming." That's when I knew the power shift was real. Not symbolic, not speculative, but actual, measurable, and already turning gears in the industry. We held our first strategic briefing at noon. Bryce, myself, the executive team, and the new engineering heads. My whiteboard was covered in formulas and roadmap notes within minutes. The room felt alive, like possibility itself was vibrating in the air. And for the first time in years, I wasn't editing myself. I wasn't hiding my brilliance to avoid intimidating fragile egos. I was leading. As I stood at the front of that room, Bryce leaned over and whispered, "Logan, this is what it looks like when the right person is in the right seat." And that's when it hit. Mythos wasn't just revenge. This was reclamation. Of my work. Of my time. Of my identity. They tried to cut me out. But I didn't disappear. I multiplied. It began with a tremor. Monday morning, while I was leading Veltrix Dynamics tech briefing, Northwave BioTech's headquarters went dark figuratively, then literally. What was supposed to be a routine weekly check-in turned into a corporate autopsy. The cause of death? Intellectual starvation. Self-inflicted. What triggered the collapse wasn't just the press release or the news of my patent. The sudden realization was that everything they'd built was standing on a trapdoor. And I just pulled the lever. By 7:15 a.m., the inboxes of Northwave's board members were flooded with investor inquiries. Major clients called to ask about ownership uncertainties and algorithmic stability. Their flagship product Cortex Stream relied entirely on the neural engine I had developed. Every data set it processed, every insight it claimed to generate, flowed through the code I had privately refined and legally secured. And now, that engine no longer belonged to them. Elaine Masters, Northwave's self-appointed visionary, had no answer when her phone lit up with the first emergency call from a Japanese investment firm. By 8 a.m., she was already in the war room, eyes hollow, voice trembling, surrounded by execs who hadn't even seen it coming. Because they weren't trained to look beneath the surface, they were trained to present, pitch, and pretend. Meanwhile, I sat in my office at Veltrix, sipping coffee and listening to the hum of innovation outside my glass door. My phone buzzed every few minutes. Industry journalists, tech columnists, and former colleagues were now jumping ship. One message caught my eye. Miguel Torres, a junior engineer whom I had mentored for years. He'd stayed behind at Northwave, thinking he still had room to grow. His message was one sentence. They just wheeled the dev servers into the boardroom. No one's talking. By 9:20 a.m., the PR team at Northwave had drafted an internal email referring to the situation as a misunderstanding around patent attribution. The phrasing was vague, cowardly, and legally fragile. I forwarded it to Veltrix Legal, who laughed out loud in their office before preparing our response. See, while they scrambled to control the narrative, we owned it. The algorithm was mine. The patent was airtight. Every line of code was time-stamped and sourced from my equipment, backed by a legal trail so clean it could have been framed. The board at Northwave called an emergency all-hands meeting at 11 a.m. It was streamed company-wide. Miguel gave me a live blow-by-blow through text. Elaine's pacing like a hostage negotiator. Legal saying the patent might be enforceable. Victor, our CFO, just stepped out at the mid-meeting, probably calling lawyers. Then, the bombshell dropped. A third-party audit report dated months ago confirmed Northwave's internal knowledge that no patent had been filed. They had discussed strategically stalling the process to cut me out before submitting. Someone leaked the memo to TechPulse, hitting social media like wildfire. The damage was no longer internal. It was public, and it was irreversible. By noon, Northwave stock had dropped 14%. By 2 p.m., the number hit 19%. Clients began issuing public statements about evaluating long-term vendor relationships. 2 major enterprise clients canceled renewals outright. The market smelled blood, and it was fresh. At Veltrix, our stock was climbing. Tech analysts dubbed it the Weller effect. I didn't celebrate. I calculated. Mid-afternoon, our licensing department received a frantic email from Northwave's chief counsel requesting a meeting. They wanted to clarify usage rights. Our response was clear: 3 times the market licensing rate. Public attribution of ownership. Non-negotiable. That last part hit harder than the price tag. For executives like Elaine, admitting that the one man they discarded was the architect of their entire product line wasn't just humiliating, it was career-ending. And then came the following message from Miguel. Elaine's out. The board just voted. CFO too. The legal head walked. I stared at my phone for a long moment. Not because I was surprised I wasn't, but because I finally understood what this all meant. It wasn't just revenge. It was a tectonic shift in the power structure of an entire company. Armed with truth, timing, and relentless documentation, one person had brought down a multi-billion-dollar tech firm's leadership team. At 5:30 p.m., I took the elevator from the Veltrix executive floor. Outside, the Arizona sky had turned burnt orange. The sun was setting, but my day wasn't over yet. My final meeting was with Bryce and our legal team. We reviewed the fallout in real time. 10 journalists had requested interviews. Our sales team reported a 31% spike in enterprise inquiries. CTOs from 3 rival firms had scheduled exploratory calls. The air was thick with opportunity. Bryce raised a glass of rye and said, "You realize this is the case study they'll teach at Stanford now, right?" I smiled, but not for the reason he thought. Because what I was thinking wasn't about glory. It was about Logan Torres, my father. He was a machinist in a New Mexico metal shop. It taught me how to solder and remain with a problem until it broke open. It taught me never to let someone else take credit for what you bled for. That night, I went home and opened a dusty toolbox he had left me when he passed. Inside was an old brass caliper and a folded note. Measure twice. Trust yourself once. I stared at it, feeling something tighten in my chest. He would have loved this moment, not for the takedown, but for the precision it took to pull it off without raising your voice. By Wednesday morning, Veltrix had finalized new Hire 6 engineers who had left Northwave after the collapse. Miguel was one of them. So were 2 developers from my original team who had been passed over for promotions and gaslit into silence. Now, they were building with me, under my leadership, at a company that saw their brilliance instead of their price tag. Elaine, on the other hand, rumors swirled that she'd joined a crisis consultancy, firm one of those outfits that teaches executives how not to get wellered. Ironic. But the real twist came Thursday morning. Northwave issued a formal press statement. In light of recent events, we are actively negotiating a long-term licensing agreement with Veltrix Dynamics to ensure uninterrupted service for our clients. We fully recognize Logan Weller's contributions as the sole inventor of the core neural processing technology and are committed to moving forward with integrity and transparency. And just like that, the final domino fell. They had spoken my name, publicly, clearly, unconditionally, not in passing, not as a former contributor, but as the inventor. The one name they tried to erase was now etched into their survival. That afternoon, I stepped onto the stage at Tech Frontiers 2025, the largest tech conference in North America. The moderator announced me as the man who rewrote the rules of innovation ownership. The applause didn't shake me, but it did center me. I looked out at the crowd of thousands founders, investors, engineers, college students and said, what they built was real, but it was mine. And you don't have to scream when someone tries to take from you what you created. You need proof. The world had changed. I could feel it. It wasn't just the silence from Northwave, the withdrawal of their attorneys, or the vanishing of their public statements. It was what filled the space they left behind. My name, my work, my voice. That Tuesday morning, I walked into Veltrix Dynamics Innovation Wing, where the team had installed a glass panel near the entrance, engraved with the patent number, the engine name, and my signature underneath it. No gold plaque. No spotlight. Just truth, etched into permanence. This wasn't about ego. It was about restoration. For years, I was the silent architect behind award-winning systems, constantly introduced as part of the team. I was the quiet force in the back row at press events. I was the mentor whose credit line somehow never reached the final slide. And now, I was at the front, fully visible, fully named. The why behind all of it was never revenge. It was clarity, refusal to live beneath the surface anymore. I had watched too many brilliant people shrink themselves, too many engineers accept silence as currency, and too many creators told to be grateful for being invited to the room. I didn't want the room. I wanted the blueprints with my name on them. The industry took notice. By Wednesday, 3 major tech publications had reached out for full interviews. Not fluff profiles, real, investigative deep dives. The kind that asks about systems architecture, intellectual property law, and the future of innovation ethics. One of the headlines read, "The man who brought a tech giant to its knees with proof." The Veltrix media team filtered the noise. I only took the interviews that mattered, not the gossipy exposés, but the ones where I could teach. I talked about documentation, about ownership, regarding boundaries between company time and personal IP. I didn't drop names or throw anyone under the bus. I didn't have to. The facts spoke for themselves. And the response? Overwhelming. College students started tagging me on LinkedIn, sharing screenshots of new work logs and dev journals they kept, just in case. A junior engineer in Austin messaged me, "Your story made me stop giving away free code. Thank you for showing us it's okay to protect your brain." That hit me harder than any market analysis. Because what good is a win if it dies with you? The one behind the recognition wasn't just me anymore. Every quiet contributor finally saw someone stand their ground and win. And maybe, just maybe, it permitted them to start walking taller. How the validation unfolded was slower than the collapse, but deeper, more enduring. I was invited to speak at the Global Tech Equity Forum, where they asked me to open the discussion on innovation justice. I'd never heard the term before, but I liked the sound of it. It felt right, felt overdue. They seated me on stage at the conference beside founders, CEOs, and policy leaders. For the first time in my career, I wasn't the add-on. I was the anchor. I shared the story, not just of the patent, but of the years leading up to it. The missed credits, the late-night revisions. I stood quietly in the conference booths, while someone else gave the demo. I told them about when I deleted my name from a prototype slide to make room for a VP's favorite intern. I still remember the click. It was one of the first times I agreed to disappear. The crowd didn't gasp. They nodded because too many of them had done the same. By Friday, I was back at Veltrix HQ, leading the second-week rollout of the neural engine's integration across 4 partner companies. Miguel, now officially a senior dev strategist under my division, walked in with a smug grin and said, "Northwave just published its quarterly report. Massive drop. Investors are demanding a full restructuring." "Let them restructure," I replied. "They already did," he smirked. "You were the foundation." That weekend, something unexpected happened. An envelope arrived at my home. Heavy cardstock, embossed seal. Inside was a handwritten invitation to the National Council for Engineering Ethics. They were awarding me their Integrity and Innovation Honor, the first time in 22 years that it had gone to someone in software. It wasn't flashy, but it meant something, because it wasn't about tech. It was about truth. The time of this shift didn't happen in one day. It wasn't Monday morning in a glass boardroom or Friday afternoon in a press junket. It happened gradually, deeply, and permanently. It happened when the power finally followed proof. And where is it? Not in Silicon Valley. Not in some ivory tower. It's not on a podcast or a headline. It happened here, in an office in Phoenix, under the hum of machines, with a team of people who chose to build something better. We didn't just win the war. We rewrote the battlefield. 1 week later, Veltrix officially overtook Northwave BioTech in market cap. Our valuation surpassed theirs by nearly $900 million. The board called an impromptu meeting. Bryce walked in with a bottle of champagne and a grin that said everything before he said a word. "Logan, the board asked me to deliver this personally. You've not only launched the most successful product cycle in company history, You've repositioned our brand as a leader in ethical innovation. I didn't toast immediately. I sat there for a second, holding the glass and staring at the horizon, and not thinking about stock prices or market leads. I thought about all the nights I spent documenting, annotating, and naming every variable as it mattered. Because it did. Finally, I raised my glass. Not in victory, in validation. Because this wasn't just a win for me. It was a proof of concept that integrity scales. 1 year later, almost to the day, I stood in front of a packed auditorium at the Global Design and Innovation Summit in Seattle. The spotlight hit my jacket collar as the applause softened. Across the sea of faces were people who once ignored me, doubted me, and replaced me. And beside them, students, young engineers, and first-gen coders who now knew my name before they knew my resume. What brought me here wasn't revenge. It was precision, preparation, proof. Once buried beneath executive slideshows, the algorithm now powers 6 flagship platforms across North America and Europe. Veltrix's valuation had doubled. Our influence stretched far beyond the neural engine. We weren't just building tech. We were changing how innovation was credited, protected, and honored. Why? Because people like me, people who build in silence, deserve more than polite applause. We deserve acknowledgement. I had lived too long in the shadows of louder voices, under managers who clipped wings and called it collaboration. So, I fought not for fame, but for permanence. The one who was never just me. It was Miguel, now leading our AI ethics division. The 6 engineers from Northwave crossed battle lines to follow the truth. The interns we mentored now track their commits like gospel, not favors. My father, Logan Torres Sr., echoed my voice when I calibrated a machine by hand. How it all came together wasn't a miracle. It was strategy, sleepless nights, and the belief that no one has the right to erase what they didn't create. We didn't just protect our IP. We rebuilt the culture around it. When the keynote ended, I stepped down to a quiet corner backstage. My assistant handed me a sleek white envelope, an invitation to speak at the U.S. Innovation and Ethics Council. The topic: how one engineer changed the industry by refusing to disappear. Where it happened didn't matter anymore. Not Phoenix. Not Silicon Valley. Not even Northwave's empty boardrooms. Legacy doesn't live in buildings. It lives in documents. In principle. In courage. And in the minds of those who watch someone stand, hold the line and say, "Number, this was mine. And I'm not handing it over." They thought they were ending my chapter. But all they did was turn the page. If there's one thing I hope you take from this story, it's this. Your value doesn't disappear just because someone refuses to see it. You don't need to shout to be powerful. You don't need permission to protect what's yours. What you build, ideas, work, hours matters. And it belongs to you, especially when you've earned it in silence. For years, I thought being low maintenance made me easier to keep. In reality, it just made it easier for me to ignore. Never again. This wasn't about revenge. It was about refusing to let my legacy be rewritten by people who didn't understand the code or the cost. So document your brilliance. Draw boundaries with sharp lines. And when someone tries to erase your name from the blueprint, hand them the proof, not a plea. Because one day, when you're standing on a stage or building something no one else dared to try, you'll realize you didn't just survive, you defined the standard. And they'll remember you, not because you played nice, but because you never let them play you.